The massive alien ships appeared above Earth without warning, their dark hulls blocking out the sun over major cities across the planet. People everywhere stopped what they were doing and stared up at the sky in fear and wonder. These were not the friendly explorers that humanity had hoped to meet among the stars. These were conquerors, and they had come with demands. On the bridge of the EDS Valiant, Earth's most advanced warship, Captain Daniel Hayes stood frozen as the alien transmission came through. The face on the screen was unlike anything humanity had encountered before. High Commander Vexthar of the Keltharian Empire looked almost reptilian, with scales that shimmered in shades of deep purple, and eyes that held nothing but cold contempt. Behind him stood representatives of 11 other alien species, all members of what they called the Galactic Coalition. Lieutenant Claire Morrison worked frantically at her tactical station, trying to get a count of the enemy vessels. Her hands trembled slightly as the numbers kept climbing. 1,500 warships surrounded Earth and its orbital stations. She had never imagined seeing so many ships in one place. Each one was larger and more advanced than anything in Earth's fleet. Commander Gregory Shaw stood beside the captain, his face pale but determined. He had spent 20 years in the fleet and thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The alien commander's voice came through the speakers with mechanical precision, translated by their advanced computers into perfect English. Every word felt like a hammer blow to everyone listening. The coalition had been watching humanity for the past 5 years, ever since Earth had developed faster than light travel and begun establishing colonies in nearby star systems. 3 of those systems, according to the coalition, belonged to them by ancient territorial rights. Humanity had violated their space. Humanity had shown itself to be an aggressive and primitive species that could not be trusted with advanced technology. The ultimatum was simple and absolute. Earth had 72 hours to comply with 3 demands. First, humanity must immediately dismantle every military installation, both on Earth and throughout the solar system. Second, all faster-than-light technology must be surrendered to the coalition for destruction. Third, Earth must accept integration into the coalition as a subject species, with no rights to self-governance or military force. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. Captain Hayes felt his blood run cold as the message ended. He looked around at his crew and saw the same fear and anger reflected in their faces. Lieutenant Morrison was blinking back tears. Commander Shaw had his jaw clenched so tight that Hayes worried he might crack a tooth. The communication officer, a young man named Peter Collins, looked like he might be sick. They all knew what this meant. Slavery or death. Those were humanity's only choices, according to the coalition. Down on Earth, in the emergency command center deep beneath Geneva, President Lisa Garrett watched the same transmission with her entire cabinet and military leadership. The room was silent for a long moment after the alien ultimatum ended. Then everyone started talking at once. General Nathan Brooks, commander of Earth's ground forces, was already pulling up tactical displays. Admiral Patricia Cole, who led the space fleet, was shaking her head slowly. The numbers were impossible. Earth had maybe 200 warships total, and most of them were patrol vessels and frigates, not proper battleships. The president held up her hand, and the room fell silent. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much conflict in her 60 years. She had been a fighter pilot in her youth, then a senator, and now the leader of the United Earth Council. She had always known this day might come. Humanity had expanded too fast, claimed too much space, made too much noise. Now someone bigger and stronger had noticed them. General Brooks spoke first, his voice rough with barely controlled rage. The coalition was offering them a choice between chains and graves. He wanted to fight. They all wanted to fight. But the math was cruel and simple. 1,500 advanced warships against 200 inferior ones. It would not be a battle. It would be a massacre, Admiral Cole added her assessment. Even if Earth's entire fleet fought with perfect coordination, even if every shot hit its target, they would be overwhelmed in hours. The coalition ships had better shields, better weapons, better everything. Humanity's only advantage was that they were fighting for their home, for their families, for their very existence as a free species. But courage and determination could not overcome such a massive technological gap. President Garrett listened to all the arguments, all the desperate calculations, all the grim predictions. Then she stood and walked to the window that looked out over the command center floor. Hundreds of people worked at stations below, coordinating Earth's defenses, evacuating civilians, preparing for the worst. These were her people. 4 billion humans on Earth and another billion scattered across the colonies, all of them looking to her for leadership, for hope, for a miracle she could not provide. She thought about her grandfather, who had fought in the last great war on Earth before the nations finally united. He had told her stories about impossible odds, about facing enemies who seemed unbeatable. He had taught her that sometimes you had to fight even when you knew you would lose, because some things were worth dying for. Freedom was one of those things. The president turned back to her advisors and gave her orders. General Brooks would activate every defense protocol they had. Admiral Cole would position the fleet for maximum effectiveness. Dr. Richard Steele, head of the Advanced Weapons Division, would be given unlimited authority to deploy any experimental technology he thought might help, and the president herself would draft Earth's response to the coalition. 2 hours later, Captain Hayes received new orders from Earth Command. He was to lead the fleet in preparing defensive positions throughout the solar system. Every ship, every weapons platform, every orbital station was to be made ready for combat. Hayes gave the orders with a heavy heart, knowing they were preparing for a battle they could not win. But then something unexpected happened. A new transmission came through from Earth, this one marked for broadcast on all frequencies in every language the coalition used. Captain Hayes played it on the main screen and felt his heart begin to pound. President Garrett appeared, standing in front of the United Earth flag, her expression carved from stone. Her words were simple and clear. Earth rejected the coalition's ultimatum in its entirety. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not disarm. Humanity would not bow to tyrants no matter how powerful they claimed to be. The coalition had made a grave mistake in threatening Earth. They had assumed humanity would react like the dozens of other species they had conquered before. They were wrong. Then came the final line, the words that would echo across the galaxy and change everything. President Garrett looked directly into the camera, her voice dropping to a tone that promised violence and retribution, and delivered Earth's counter-message to the coalition. You have sealed your fate. The coalition fleet hung in space like a dark cloud of metal and death, waiting for humanity's inevitable collapse. High Commander Vexthar watched the human response with something close to amusement. In his 300 years of military service, he had delivered ultimatums to 47 different species. Every single one had surrendered within the first day. Some had even begged for mercy before the deadline expired. These humans would be no different. Their bold words meant nothing against the reality of overwhelming force. But down on Earth and throughout the solar system, something remarkable was happening. The 72 hours became a storm of activity unlike anything humanity had ever accomplished. What the coalition's sensors could not detect, what their arrogance would not let them believe, was that Earth had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Deep beneath the red sands of Mars, in a facility that did not officially exist, Dr. Richard Steele stood before a massive display showing weapons systems that had been built in absolute secrecy. He was a thin man with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving. For the past 10 years, he had dedicated his life to a single goal: making sure humanity would never be defenseless against alien threats. His team had scavenged technology from destroyed pirate vessels, reverse-engineered weapons from black market dealers, and pushed human engineering to its absolute limits. Dr. Helen Martinez worked beside him, coordinating the activation of weapons platforms hidden throughout the asteroid belt. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a mind that could calculate orbital mechanics faster than most computers. Together, they had created Project Horizon, a network of automated defense systems that the coalition had somehow missed in all their scans. Maybe the aliens had been too confident to look carefully. Maybe they simply could not imagine a primitive species being so devious. Either way, their mistake would cost them dearly. On Mars itself, Commander Jake Sullivan rallied his defense group. He was a former mining engineer who had joined the military after pirates attacked his station and killed his crew. The Red Planet had always been his home, and he would die before letting aliens take it. His forces consisted of 50 warships, most of them converted cargo haulers with military weapons grafted onto their hulls. They looked rough and unimpressive, but Sullivan knew something the coalition did not. Sometimes the ugliest ships were the most dangerous. Out in the asteroid belt, Captain Michelle Carter commanded the patrol forces that kept the mining operation safe. She was young for a captain, only 32, but she had earned her rank through brilliant tactical thinking and nerves of steel. Her fleet was even smaller than Sullivan's, just 30 vessels scattered across millions of kilometers of space. But those 30 ships had spent years playing cat and mouse with pirates in the belt. They knew every rock, every hiding spot, every trick for making a pursuer lose their target. The real genius behind Earth's defense strategy was Colonel Vincent Pierce, a man who had spent his entire adult life studying warfare. He had analyzed every bit of data humanity had collected on alien combat tactics. He had read reports from the few species who had escaped coalition conquest. He had watched recordings of their battles and noticed patterns, weaknesses, and gaps in their thinking. The coalition fought like an empire that had never truly been challenged. They were powerful but predictable. They had doctrine and formations and procedures. Pierce had written a 300-page manual on how to kill them. Back on Earth, Captain Daniel Hayes received his orders directly from Admiral Cole. The Valiant and the main fleet would position themselves near the moon, hidden in its shadow until the perfect moment. Hayes walked through his ship, checking on his crew, making sure they understood what was coming. Lieutenant Morrison had stopped trembling. Her fear had burned away, leaving only cold determination. Commander Shaw was pushing the engineering teams to get every last bit of power from their weapon systems. They all knew the odds. They all knew this might be their last day alive. None of them cared anymore. In the underground shelters, civilians huddled together and waited. Sergeant Kevin Wright organized volunteer militias in case the coalition broke through and landed ground forces. He was an old soldier, his hair white and his back bent, but his eyes still burned with the fire of a warrior. Beside him, Corporal Amy Foster drilled teenagers and grandparents in basic combat tactics. If the aliens wanted Earth, they would have to pry it from humanity's cold, dead hands. President Garrett broadcast a message to every human in the solar system. She did not promise them victory. She did not tell them everything would be fine. Instead, she told them the truth. The next few days would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or died as slaves. Every person had a role to play. Every sacrifice would matter. Future generations would remember this moment as either humanity's finest hour or its last. The coalition watched all of this preparation with contempt. High Commander Vexthar sent mocking messages to Earth Command. He told them their resistance was pointless. He offered to make their deaths quick if they surrendered immediately. He could not understand why they insisted on this futile defiance. In his mind, the outcome was already decided. His fleet would sweep through the solar system like a tide, crushing the primitive humans, and the coalition would add another conquered species to their empire. What Vexthar did not know, what none of the coalition species could imagine, was that humanity had one advantage that trumped all their superior technology. Humans were survivors. They had crawled out of caves and conquered their own world. They had split the atom and touched the stars. They had faced extinction a dozen times and always found a way to endure. Every human carried in their genes the legacy of ancestors who had refused to give up, who had fought impossible odds, who had somehow survived when nothing else did. Dr. Steele activated the first weapons platform and watched it come online with a smile. Dr. Martinez brought the next one active, then another, then a dozen more. On Mars, Commander Sullivan positioned his ships in attack formation. In the belt, Captain Carter scattered her vessels like seeds waiting to bloom into violence. Colonel Pierce uploaded his tactical plans to every ship computer in the fleet. Captain Hayes brought the Valiant to full combat readiness. The 72 hours ticked down to nothing. The coalition fleet began moving into the solar system, their formation perfect, their confidence absolute. They advanced toward Mars, expecting to sweep aside whatever token defense the humans had prepared. Their sensors showed the expected human ships ahead, outnumbered and outgunned. Victory would take mere hours, but the coalition was not advancing into battle. They were advancing into a trap, a killing ground that humanity had spent 10 years preparing. Every weapons platform, every hidden missile battery, every carefully positioned ship was a piece of a greater plan. The coalition had assumed they were hunting prey. They were about to learn that they were the ones being hunted. High Commander Vexthar gave the order to engage, his voice carrying the bored tone of someone performing a routine task. His ships accelerated toward Mars, weapons charging, shields at maximum. In a few minutes, they would be in range to open fire on the human defenses. In a few minutes, this irritating resistance would end. In those few minutes, everything changed. The Coalition fleet crossed into Mars orbit with their weapons ready, and their shields glowing bright. High Commander Vexthar stood on his command deck, watching the primitive human ships ahead. There were maybe 60 vessels clustered around the red planet, barely enough to qualify as a defense force. His fleet of 1,500 would crush them in minutes. He prepared to give the order to fire, expecting this to be quick and simple. Then the universe exploded into violence. Hidden weapons platforms erupted from the surface of Mars and its 2 moons. Dozens of railgun emplacements that had been buried under rock and sand for years suddenly came alive. They fired in perfect synchronization, launching tungsten rods the size of telephone poles at velocities that bent the laws of physics. The projectiles crossed the distance in seconds, moving so fast that the Coalition shields might as well have been made of paper. The first salvo destroyed 80 Coalition ships before anyone could react. The tungsten rods punched through shields, tore through armor, and ripped vessels apart from the inside. Explosions blossomed across the enemy formation like deadly flowers. Debris and bodies spun out into space. The Coalition crews had no time to scream, no time to understand what was happening. One moment they were advancing to certain victory. The next moment they were dying. Commander Sullivan watched from his command ship as the trap was sprung. He felt a savage joy rising in his chest. The aliens had thought Mars would be an easy target. They were learning how wrong they had been. He opened the communication channel to his fleet and gave the order they had all been waiting for. Attack with everything they had. Show these invaders what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. The Mars Defense Group came roaring out from behind the planet's shadow. Sullivan's ships were ugly and crude compared to the sleek Coalition vessels, but they carried weapons that had been designed with one purpose: to kill things much bigger and stronger than themselves. Fusion missiles streaked across space, each one carrying a warhead that burned at the temperature of a star's core. The Coalition ships tried to shoot them down, but there were too many coming too fast from too many directions. The missiles hit shields and overloaded them instantly. They punched through armor and detonated inside ship hulls. Nuclear fire consumed Coalition vessels from within, turning sophisticated warships into expanding clouds of radioactive gas. Sullivan's gunners were firing with precision born from years of fighting pirates in the belt. Every shot counted. Every missile found its target. The Coalition formation began to break apart. High Commander Vexthar finally understood that something had gone terribly wrong. His fleet had lost over 100 ships in the first 2 minutes of combat. That was impossible. These were primitive humans with inferior technology. They should not have been able to hurt his forces at all. He shouted orders to his subordinates, demanding they reform the line and concentrate fire. But the chaos was spreading too fast. From the asteroid belt, Captain Carter's forces struck like ghosts. Her ships had positioned themselves in the perfect spots, hiding among the rocks and debris that filled the space between Mars and Jupiter. The Coalition sensors had swept right past them, unable to distinguish warships from space junk. Now those hidden vessels launched their own attack, hitting the Coalition fleet from a completely unexpected angle. Carter had something special prepared for the aliens. Her engineers had spent months building drone swarms. Thousands of small autonomous fighters that could operate without human pilots. Each drone was barely bigger than a car, fast and maneuverable in ways that large ships could never match. They poured out of her vessels like angry wasps, filling space with targets too small and too numerous to track effectively. The Coalition point defense systems tried to shoot them down, but quickly became overwhelmed. For every drone destroyed, 3 more got through. They crashed into Coalition ships with suicidal precision, their small explosive charges detonating against shields and hulls. Individually, each drone did minimal damage, but thousands of them working together could tear apart even the largest vessels. Coalition cruisers began venting atmosphere and spinning out of control. Nuclear-pumped laser arrays hidden throughout the belt activated next. These weapons used controlled nuclear explosions to generate beams of coherent light, powerful enough to cut through starship armor like butter. They fired from dozens of positions, creating a web of destruction that the Coalition could not escape. Beams sliced through ship after ship, cutting them into pieces that tumbled away into the void. The Coalition forces tried to retreat but found their escape route blocked. The EDS Valiant emerged from behind the moon with the entire Earth defense fleet. Captain Hayes stood on his bridge feeling a fierce pride in his species. The aliens had thought humanity would surrender without a fight. They had thought humans were weak and primitive. Now they were learning the truth in the hardest way possible. Lieutenant Morrison worked her tactical station with movement so fast her fingers blurred. She coordinated targeting data between all the human ships, making sure every weapon fired with maximum efficiency. Commander Shaw had the Valiant's experimental plasma cannons charged to 200% of their rated capacity. The engineers had warned him the weapons might explode from the strain. He told them to fire anyway. The Valiant's main gun spoke with a voice like thunder. Superheated plasma crossed space at relativistic speeds and slammed into Coalition dreadnoughts. The impacts created explosions visible from Earth. Shaw fired again and again, pushing the weapons past every safety limit. One of the cannons did explode, killing 3 engineers and blowing a hole in the ship's side. Shaw sealed that section and kept firing with the remaining guns. Captain Hayes maneuvered the Valiant like a fighter instead of a battleship. He twisted and turned, using the larger Coalition vessels as cover while his guns tore them apart at close range. Other human ships followed his example. They fought with a recklessness that the Coalition could not match. Every human knew they might die today. None of them cared. All that mattered was taking as many aliens with them as possible. The battle raged for 18 hours without pause. Humans and aliens died in the cold vacuum of space. Ships exploded or broke apart or simply went dark and drifted away. The solar system became a graveyard of shattered metal and frozen bodies. But slowly, impossibly, the balance began to shift in humanity's favor. The Coalition had superior numbers and superior technology, but they were fighting an enemy they did not understand. Humans fought differently than any species the Coalition had encountered. They did not retreat when wounded. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought with a fury born from millions of years of evolution on a planet that had tried to kill them in every way imaginable. They were apex predators who had conquered their own world, and they would not bow to alien masters. High Commander Vexithar watched his fleet disintegrate around him. He had lost 900 ships, 900 of the Coalition's finest warships destroyed by primitives who should not have been able to challenge them at all. His perfect formation was gone. His carefully planned invasion had become a desperate struggle for survival. For the first time in his long life, Vexthar felt something he had never experienced before: fear. He gave the order to retreat. The surviving Coalition ships broke off combat and fled back toward the outer solar system. Human forces pursued them, firing until their weapons ran dry and their ammunition was exhausted. Captain Hayes wanted to chase them all the way back to their home worlds, but Admiral Cole ordered the fleet to hold position. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. In the silence after the fighting ended, humanity counted the cost. 70 human ships had been destroyed. 3,000 crew members were dead. Mars had taken damage from Coalition weapons that got through the defenses, but they had survived. Against impossible odds, against an enemy that should have crushed them easily, humanity had survived and won. President Garrett stood in the command center and looked at the casualty reports with tears in her eyes. So many dead, so many families destroyed. But they had proven something important. They had shown the galaxy that Earth would not surrender. They had sent a message written in fire and blood and shattered starships. The Coalition had sealed their own fate the moment they threatened humanity. Now the entire galaxy would learn what that meant. The Coalition fleet limped away from the solar system with less than half their ships intact. High Commander Vexthar sat in his command chair staring at nothing, his mind unable to process what had happened. In one day, humanity had destroyed 900 of the finest warships the galaxy had ever produced. The impossible had become reality. The primitives had won. President Garrett did not waste time celebrating. The moment the enemy ships jumped to faster than light speed, she activated the next phase of humanity's plan. This was no longer about defense. This was about making sure the Coalition never threatened Earth again. She walked into the broadcasting center where Lieutenant Brandon Scott and his communications team had been working around the clock. They had captured Coalition communication equipment during the battle and reverse-engineered it with help from specialist Laura Jenkins, a young woman who understood alien technology better than anyone on Earth. The equipment was ready. President Garrett stood before the camera and began speaking. Her words were being translated into every language used by the Coalition's 12-member species. Her message was being broadcast on every frequency, to every world, to every ship, to every station across thousands of light years. The Coalition would hear her, but more importantly, all the species they ruled would hear her too. She spoke simply and clearly. Earth had not wanted this war. Humanity had been exploring space peacefully when the Coalition arrived with threats and ultimatums. The Coalition had demanded total surrender, the destruction of human technology, and permanent enslavement. Earth had refused. The Coalition had attacked with overwhelming force. Earth had destroyed them. Now humanity would finish what the Coalition had started. The President's next words made High Commander Vexthar's blood run cold when he heard them. Any species that continued to support Coalition aggression against Earth would be considered an enemy of humanity. But any species that chose peace, that stood aside, or better yet joined Earth in opposing the Coalition's tyranny, would be welcomed as friends and allies. The choice was theirs. Choose quickly, because humanity was coming. General Nathan Brooks stood in the war room coordinating Operation Retribution. The name had been his idea. The Coalition had tried to destroy humanity. Now humanity would show them the meaning of consequences. Every available warship was being prepared for offensive operations. Captured Coalition vessels were being retrofitted with human weapons and crewed by volunteers who had lost family in the battle. Dr. Richard Steele's weapons division was working overtime to equip the fleet with every experimental technology they had. Captain Daniel Hayes received his new orders with grim satisfaction. He was promoted to admiral and given command of Battle Group Alpha, 60 ships including the Valiant. His mission was to strike deep into Coalition space and destroy military installations. He was given complete tactical freedom. The only rule was to avoid civilian casualties whenever possible. Humanity would not become monsters to fight monsters. They would show the galaxy that Earth could be ruthless to its enemies while still holding on to its principles. Admiral Hayes selected his targets carefully. The Coalition had military bases on 17 different worlds. Each base coordinated fleet movements and supplied warships throughout their territory. Destroying those bases would cripple the Coalition's ability to respond to threats. Hayes split his forces into smaller groups and planned simultaneous strikes. The Coalition would not know which target to defend because all of them would be under attack at once. Commander Jake Sullivan led one of those strike forces. His ships had been repaired and rearmed after the Battle of Mars. He carried with him 3 captured Coalition cruisers that had been so badly damaged their crews abandoned them. Human engineers had patched them together and installed human weapons. They were ugly hybrids of 2 technologies, but they worked. Sullivan approached a Coalition military station in the Praxian system, with those 3 cruisers leading his formation. The station's sensors identified them as friendly vessels and did not raise alarms until it was too late. Sullivan's forces tore the station apart in 12 minutes. He specifically targeted weapons and shield generators while avoiding the crew quarters. When the station was defenseless, he broadcast a message giving the alien crews 30 minutes to evacuate in life pods. Most of them took the offer. Sullivan destroyed the empty station with fusion missiles and jumped away before reinforcements could arrive. Captain Michelle Carter led another strike group to the Uthari homeworld. The Coalition kept a major fleet base in orbit around the planet. Carter approached using an old pirate trick she had learned in the asteroid belt. Her ships flew in with their reactors at minimum power, coasting on momentum, playing dead. The Coalition sensors swept past them thinking they were debris or abandoned hulks. Carter's fleet drifted right into the middle of the enemy formation before anyone realized the truth. The battle was short and brutal. Carter's ships activated all systems at once and opened fire at point-blank range. Nuclear torpedoes slammed into Coalition ships before their shields could come online. Laser batteries carved through hulls. The enemy never had a chance to coordinate a defense. Carter destroyed 40 warships and crippled the orbital base before jumping away. The entire attack took less than an hour. Major Gary Thompson led special operations teams on even more dangerous missions. His people infiltrated Coalition worlds using captured ships and forged identification codes. They moved through enemy territory like shadows, gathering intelligence and striking at high-value targets. Thompson personally led a raid on a Coalition command center, a fortified bunker on a moon where military leaders coordinated fleet movements. His team of 20 soldiers fought through 200 guards to plant explosives in the facility's power core. The explosion was visible from space. Every day brought news of more victories. Human forces struck the Coalition in dozens of places simultaneously. The aliens could not predict where the next attack would come. They could not defend everything at once. Their empire began to crack under the pressure. Species that had been conquered decades ago started to question why they should fight for masters who could not protect them. The Uthari Collective was the first to break away. Their leaders announced they were withdrawing from the coalition and declaring neutrality. They wanted no part in a war against humanity. The Praxian Unity followed 2 days later, then the Belthar Republic. One by one, coalition members decided that survival was more important than loyalty to an empire that was clearly losing. High Commander Vexthar watched his life's work fall apart. The coalition had stood for 400 years, conquering and absorbing species across the galaxy. Now humans, primitives who had barely reached the stars, were destroying everything he had fought to build. His own government was pressuring him to negotiate peace. He refused. The idea of surrendering to humans was more than his pride could bear. Commander Elizabeth Harper led a daring raid that became legendary among human forces. She took 12 ships deep into Keltharian space, the Coalition's core territory. Her target was the Central Military Command facility on the Keltharian homeworld itself. The building was supposed to be impregnable, protected by shields and defense satellites and an entire fleet in orbit. Harper proved that nothing was truly safe from determined humans. Her infiltration team included Sergeant Chris Allen, an explosives expert who could make a bomb out of spare parts and tape, and Agent Nicole Perry, who spoke 6 alien languages and could forge any document. They landed on the planet using a captured Coalition shuttle and walked right through security checkpoints with fake credentials. The aliens never suspected humans would be bold enough to attack their capital world. The team planted charges throughout the command center over 3 days, working at night when fewer people were around. When they finally detonated the explosives, the entire building collapsed into rubble. Dozens of high-ranking military officers died in the blast. The Coalition's ability to coordinate fleet movements was crippled. Harper's team escaped during the chaos and jumped out of the system before anyone could catch them. The raid on the Keltharian homeworld broke something in the Coalition's leadership. If humans could strike at the very heart of their empire, then nowhere was safe. Fear began to spread. Officers questioned their orders. Ships deserted their posts. The perfect military machine that had conquered dozens of species was falling apart. But High Commander Vexthar made one final desperate decision. If the Coalition was going to fall, he would make sure humanity paid the ultimate price. He ordered the deployment of planet-killer weapons against human colonies. These were forbidden weapons, banned by every civilized species capable of sterilizing entire worlds. Vexthar did not care about civilization anymore. He only cared about revenge. The attack hit New Haven Colony without warning. Commander Stephen Walsh, the colony's defense coordinator, saw the weapon coming on his sensors and knew immediately what it was. He sounded the evacuation alarm and began loading civilians onto every ship available. 30,000 people made it off the planet before the weapon struck. 20,000 did not. New Haven burned. Its atmosphere set on fire, its surface turned to glass. An entire world died in minutes. News of the massacre reached Earth in Juni. The images from New Haven Colony burned themselves into the minds of every human who saw them. Entire cities reduced to ash and melted glass. Forests turned to carbon. Oceans boiled away into steam. 20,000 people murdered by a weapon so terrible that even the most warlike species had agreed never to use it. High Commander Vexthar had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Now he would learn what humanity did to those who killed their children. Dr. Helen Martinez stood in her laboratory looking at equations that represented the end of worlds. She had spent years developing this technology, hoping humanity would never need to use it. The quantum entanglement bomb was the most dangerous weapon ever created by human minds. It could cause a star to collapse into itself, triggering a supernova that would consume everything in the system. One bomb could kill billions. Dr. Martinez had nightmares about what her creation could do. Now those nightmares were about to become real. President Garrett called an emergency meeting with her entire military leadership. General Nathan Brooks argued for immediate deployment of the Star Killer weapons against every Coalition world. Admiral Patricia Cole urged caution, warning that using such weapons would make humanity no better than the Coalition. The debate raged for hours while the ashes of New Haven were still cooling. Finally, the president made her decision. She would give the Coalition one last chance to avoid total annihilation. Admiral Daniel Hayes received orders to take the entire human fleet to Kelthara Prime, the Coalition capital world. He was to deliver an ultimatum. The Coalition leadership had 24 hours to surrender unconditionally, stand trial for war crimes, and dismantle their empire. Every species they had conquered would be freed. Every planet-killer weapon would be destroyed. The leaders responsible for New Haven would face justice. If the Coalition refused, Earth would show no mercy. The star-killer weapons would be deployed, and the Coalition would cease to exist. Hayes assembled the largest fleet humanity had ever put into space. 500 warships bearing Earth's colors. 200 more ships crewed by aliens from species that had defected to humanity's side. They had seen what the Coalition truly was, an empire built on fear and oppression. They wanted freedom, and they had chosen to fight alongside the species brave enough to challenge their former masters. The combined fleet was a statement of power that could not be ignored. Captain Michelle Carter commanded a squadron of fast attack ships in the fleet. Commander Jake Sullivan led the heavy cruisers that would smash through any defense. Colonel Vincent Pierce had planned the battle strategy down to the last detail, accounting for every possible response the Coalition might make. Commander Gregory Shaw had pushed the Valiant's weapons systems beyond anything the designers thought possible. Lieutenant Claire Morrison coordinated targeting data for the entire fleet. Every human and every allied alien knew this was the final battle. Everything would be decided at Kelthera Prime. The journey took 3 days at maximum, faster than light speed. When the fleet emerged in the Kelthera system, they found the Coalition had gathered every remaining warship for a final defense. High Commander Vexthar had called in forces from across the galaxy. 600 Coalition vessels surrounded their homeworld in layered defensive formations. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons. Shield generators on the planet's surface created layers of protection. The Coalition had prepared for a siege. Admiral Hayes broadcast the ultimatum on all frequencies. His words were translated into every language spoken in the Coalition. Surrender and live. Fight and die. The choice was simple. 24 hours to decide the fate of their entire civilization. Then he ordered the fleet to hold position just outside weapons range and wait. On the surface of Kelthera Prime, the Coalition leadership met in emergency session. Some argued for immediate surrender. They had seen what humanity could do. They had watched their empire crumble under relentless human attacks. Further resistance was suicide. Others insisted they could still win. They had more ships, better defensive positions, and the determination of a species fighting for their homeworld. The debate grew heated as the clock ticked down. High Commander Vexthar sat in his command center watching the human fleet and feeling nothing but hatred. He had dedicated his life to the Coalition. He had conquered worlds in their name. He had brought order to chaos across the galaxy. Now these upstart humans dared to demand his surrender. The idea was obscene. He would rather die than bow to primitives. He began issuing orders for a final attack, rallying his forces for one last stand against the human invaders. The Coalition fleet moved to intercept before the ultimatum expired. Vexthar led them personally, his flagship at the front of the formation. He opened communication channels and shouted defiance at the humans. The Coalition would never surrender. They would fight to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. If humanity wanted Kelthera Prime, they would have to burn for it. Admiral Hayes felt sadness as he gave the order to engage. So many lives about to be lost because of one leader's pride, but he had his orders. The Coalition had chosen death. Humanity would deliver it. The fleet surged forward, weapons charging, shields at maximum. This would be the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of ships, millions of lives. One final test of wills between an ancient empire and a young species that refused to be conquered. The Battle of Kelthera Prime began with a fury that made the earlier fight at Mars look like a skirmish. Coalition ships fired everything they had. Missiles filled space like a swarm of angry insects. Energy beams created a web of destruction. Human ships answered with their own weapons, plasma cannons and railguns and fusion torpedoes. Explosions lit up the darkness. Ships died by the dozens every minute. Captain Carter led her attack squadron through gaps in the Coalition formation, targeting their command ships. Commander Sullivan's heavy cruisers traded shots with Coalition dreadnoughts at point-blank range. The Valiant carved through enemy lines with Commander Shaw firing the main guns so fast they began to glow red from the heat. Lieutenant Morrison directed fire from 300 ships simultaneously, her mind processing tactical data faster than any computer. The battle raged for 3 days without pause. Crews fought until they collapsed from exhaustion, then were dragged away and replaced by fresh personnel. Ships ran out of ammunition and resorted to ramming attacks. Coalition vessels crashed into human warships in desperate suicide runs. Human captains returned the favor, driving their damaged ships into enemy formations and detonating their reactors. Space became a graveyard of metal and frozen bodies stretching across millions of kilometers. High Commander Vexthar's flagship took a direct hit from the Valiant's plasma cannons on the second day. The blast tore through his shields and ripped open the hull. Atmosphere vented into space. Emergency systems failed. Vexthar stood on his tilting command deck as fire consumed his ship around him. He died still shouting defiance, refusing to accept defeat even as death claimed him. His flagship exploded seconds later, taking 300 crew with it. The Coalition fleet broke after their commander died. Ships began surrendering or fleeing. The orbital defenses fell silent as their crews abandoned their posts. The planetary shields flickered and died. Admiral Hayes could have ordered the bombardment of Kelthera Prime, could have killed billions in revenge for New Haven. Instead, he offered mercy one final time. Surrender now and live. Face justice but live. Most of the Coalition leadership accepted. A few tried to flee and were destroyed by their own people, who had decided survival was more important than pride. The war ended, not with a final climactic explosion, but with exhausted silence. Both sides had bled themselves nearly dry. The human fleet had lost 200 ships. The Coalition fleet was completely destroyed. Kelthera Prime was defenseless. The empire that had stood for 400 years was finished. President Garrett arrived at Kelthera Prime 2 weeks later to oversee the creation of a new galactic order. She met with leaders from dozens of species, including those who had fought against humanity and those who had joined Earth's cause. Together they drafted the Charter for the Terran Alliance, a voluntary union of free species who would defend each other as equals. No more empires, no more conquest. Species could join or remain independent. The only rule was that aggression against member worlds would be met with the combined force of the entire alliance. Dr. Richard Steele supervised the dismantling of planet-killer weapons across the galaxy. Every star-killer bomb was destroyed. Every doomsday device was taken apart. Humanity shared the technology to detect such weapons, making sure they could never be used in secret again. The galaxy would remember what happened when such weapons were deployed. General Brooks coordinated the war crimes trials. Coalition leaders who had ordered atrocities faced justice. Some were executed, others spent the rest of their lives in prison. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valiant looking at the stars and thinking about how far humanity had come. From a single threatened world to the founders of a new galactic civilization, the cost had been terrible. Millions dead, worlds damaged, fleets destroyed. But humanity had survived. They had proven that courage and determination could overcome even the longest odds. They had shown the